Welcome to the What I Wish I Knew After Pregnancy Loss podcast. I am your host, Shana Southern. I am an angel mum, rainbow mum, a pregnancy loss practitioner, and trauma-informed coach. I created the Institute of Healing Through Pregnancy Loss out of my own experience with loss in the hopes to provide understanding and healing, educating people on pregnancy loss, and creating more women or men in trained support roles. In this podcast, I hope to shed light on what I wish I knew in relation to pregnancy loss, opening up the conversation, breaking the stigma, and bringing real-life stories plus guest experts. Thank you for being here with me today, and let's dive into today's episode. Welcome, beautiful souls, to the What I Wish I Knew After Pregnancy Loss podcast. Today, I have with me the beautiful Rachel Lohman. Rachel holds a master's degree in theology and ministry from Fuller Theological Seminary. She's a pastor, a speaker, and the founder of Hope Again Collective, a handmade jewelry line that shares the stories of lost mums. Rachel is a mother of 2 living children and 1 in heaven. She and her husband Mark currently lead The Bridge, a bilingual church in Southern California. Rachel's first book on finding hope after pregnancy and infant loss releases in August 2023. Thanks for joining us, Rachel. For those who may not be familiar with you yet, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Sharna. You're my first Australian podcast to be on, so this is such an honor.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's such a treat. So yeah, I live in Southern California. I grew up in the States, secretly would love to move abroad, maybe not so secretly, but yeah, our family is here and my husband and I pastor a local church here. And I spend a lot of my time making jewelry for Hope Again Collective, which is how you and I first connected, and helping lost moms tell their stories. And one of the really beautiful things about this line of work is I have a lot of moms who will send their stories in through my website and tell me afterwards that it's the first time that they've sat down and written out their story. So I'm so grateful for that honor every day, just to share that really special transformative space, when you're able to tell a big piece of your heart and your story that's not always welcome in every social circle, but to do that in a safe space and find healing with that. So yeah, that's a bit about what life looks like now. And as you mentioned, my first book, Miscarried Hope, Journeying with Jesus Through Pregnancy and Infant Loss, has come out in August. So I am thrilled to have a book on the market. And yeah, really, I wrote the resource I wish I had had to help me guide my faith and my own hope after going through miscarriage about 6 years ago. So I just hope that it will encourage women on their hope journeys as well after loss.
So beautiful. And like you said, we initially connected through Hope Again Collective. And I think it's an absolutely beautiful, I guess it's not just jewelry. It's like a resource for people, resource for women to also not feel like they are navigating this time alone. And like you said, there's probably been some women that have only just shared their story, and for them to be able to finally have that safe space to share and feel seen and validated would be like this really huge part of their healing and recovery journey.
Yeah.
And they're beautiful pieces as well. And I think, did I read it right where you also donate part of the proceeds to charity?
Yeah. So actually directly to a lost mom who has some sort of medical grief. A lot of moms who have stillborns, they have to come up with money for a funeral and all of the expenses that go along with that. So to date, we've been able to give over $10,000 back to lost moms directly to help them with their grief care just from the jewelry sales. So each month we donate to one specific mom, and that has been just such a cool way to support this community.
It's huge. And you don't ever, obviously you're never going to anticipate having loss as part of your journey. And then when you're actually navigating that, you come up against all of these financial, things that you have to pay for that you've never, ever factored in. And then you're trying to navigate time, like the grief and obviously all of that, as well as financial strain. So I think it's a beautiful thing that you've been able to obviously create your beautiful pieces of jewelry, but they're actually also supporting someone that's really navigating such hardship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want to also talk about your book because I didn't realize that you had a book until when I reached out to you to be on the podcast because I wanted to talk to you about the jewelry. And then you're like, well, I have this book. And I'm like, oh, it's amazing. Like you're just going from like one thing to another, like one strength to another, and really just, putting out there. And like you said, they're resources that you kind of were searching for yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the reason why I created what I've created was because I needed it myself. And I knew that if I needed it, there's someone out there that needs it too. And it might only be one person, it might be 5, it might be 10, it might be 100. But you know that if you're searching for it, the chances are there's going to be someone else searching for it as well.
Absolutely.
So we can talk a little bit about your book. And there's a few things that kind of stood out to me that I want to touch on. So the first thing is in the introduction, you write, the hope I found after loss was more beautiful, deeper, and more transforming than I imagined was possible. Do you want to share and unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. I really think I had a pretty shallow understanding of what hope was until I went through an experience where I felt like I lost hope. And only then did I pause to really define hope and to look at the role that it played in not only my day-to-day living, because it plays a role in all of our day-to-day living, but also my future. And I say that I think I had a shallow understanding of hope in the past because I just associated it with optimism, feeling good about the future, kind of like being a dreamer and just having positivity towards the future, like it was an emotion, and not necessarily ever pausing to think that hope, especially when we look at it in the Bible, really comes out of the hardest circumstances. Like we think about the hope of Jesus with the resurrection on Easter, that only showed up after it looked like death had won. And so I am encountering and experiencing such a deeper sense of hope because I realized, hey, if my only understanding of hope is something that's like optimistic and I'm only rolling with it when life is going well, that's not the reality of life. And how am I going to navigate hope when life is hard? Yeah. So I'm still in a process of rediscovering my relationship with hope. But what I can say is, yeah, it's been so much deeper. It's more than just a feeling. And I think I've really been able to anchor it in the biblical promise of hope, which prior to, I know I'd hear that word tossed around in church, but it never really sunk in until I went through loss and had that feeling of hopelessness for the first time.
And I think I was a bit the same. Like it was almost like it was just all this word that you would hear and you'd be like, oh, yes, I have hope. Like, and it almost felt like a real whimsical thing that you would throw around.
Right.
And when you go through these really dark times, it does it challenges everything that you're going through. It challenges all of your beliefs. It challenges and makes you reprioritize and reassess like everything about you and what you believed was true. But I think hope, finding the sort of maybe more of a deeper definition of hope and being able to reconnect to something like that. And it's only by really experiencing the darkness that we can find what that true beauty is.
Right.
I feel like I went through that myself. Like everything on the other side of my pain was so much more beautiful than what I had ever anticipated it to be. Like, I always say like that my days were brighter, the colors were brighter, the smells were stronger, like everything was just different. And you do get that real completely different definition of hope at that point.
Yeah, it's like the fragility of life it flashes before your eyes. And there's a richness to the world that had always been there, but you took it for granted or maybe didn't notice in the way that you notice after loss. So I think that was a beautiful articulation of what many of us experience, Sharna. Yeah.
Yeah. You also mentioned with the hope, you've discovered maybe the 5 stages of hope. And I really want you to share a little bit about that because I think that's beautiful.
Yeah. I have always heard a lot about the stages of grief. I don't know if you have as well, but that gets thrown around a lot. There was a lot of psychology and research on that. But I found myself realizing after my loss, nobody has given me a framework for the stages of hope that I'm going through. So what I've done my best to develop is out of Holy Week, which is like the basis of my book, looking at the historical events in the Bible during Jesus's last week on earth. From that, I've pulled 5 stages of hope. And I hope more than anything else that this will help women to name the feeling and the season that they are in. So it's not perfect. It's not like this, oh, I have to check this box off in stage 1 in order to move to stage 2. Like they're not perfectly linear, but it's more so like a roadmap. Like here's what you can expect in your journey to be feeling these things, to look ahead and to know it's not always going to feel this hopeless, but really just to give language to help name the stages that you're walking through. So the 5 stages of hope that I have outlined my book around, and these will especially ring true for pregnancy and infant loss, is the first stage of recovering hope actually begins with the breach of hope. So you don't need to find hope again if your relationship with hope doesn't change. So it starts with expectation, and you have these high hopes of pregnancy and new dreams of motherhood and parenthood or whatever that's going to look like. That's followed by shock. The minute that you know that something is not as it should be, but you're also part of shock is not letting that sink into your reality yet. You're still hopeful that something's going to change and everything will be okay. The third stage of hope is despair. And that's what we see, like the crucifixion. That's what I equate it with on Good Friday, when it's like, no, the worst thing that we wanted is actually true. Like just as the disciples didn't want Jesus to have to go to the cross. We didn't want our babies to have to, we didn't want to accept that this reality that death is really imminent, and it is. Then we move into grief, which is often marked by silence. And that's where I think lost moms spend the longest time in their recovery with hope, is in the grief stage. For me, that was months and months long. And I parallel that with Silent Saturday in the Bible, which is just right before the active hope of Resurrection Sunday, where hope shows up in a surprising way. Just as you and I were chatting about before, nobody expected that hope would come out of this horrible thing that happens to Jesus, who everybody thought was going to be, the Messiah, the one they've been waiting for, their high expectations, everything was going to be fulfilled. Nobody thought that was going to end in death, but then that hope was going to win and was going to defeat death. It's kind of like when you first felt hope again after loss, something made you smile, something made you dream about the future. You realized, I'm going to be okay. There is something hope-filled about my future. And I know that can be a hard feeling for a lot of us lost moms to feel. Many times you feel guilty over feeling any bit excited or hopeful about the future because you think that somehow disrespects or minimizes the grief. But that's not the case. That's just a sign of like seeing the world with new eyes, like we were just talking about, and realizing this is part of my story now. And it's okay for me to accept this as part of my life, but also open my eyes to the beauty that's around me and in front of me. So I unpack those in a lot greater detail, but just to give you an overview, those are the 5 stages of hope.
I think it's a beautiful thing too, because like you said, there's so much around about the stages of grief. And then a lot of your focus is on that. And then you're like, okay, so it's grief. But then we're very laser focused around grief, the emotions. And it seems to be a really sort of a darker association with what we're going through.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if we're able to flip that around and understand, yes, grief is part of it, but it's part of a bigger picture, and it's part of your hope, and reconnecting to that, like you said, a hope-filled future, one where you can be happy and one where you're not constantly overwhelmed with immense sadness and heartache and pain. I remember wanting to stay in that because I felt like if I chose not to be there, it meant that I was forgetting, or it meant that I was moving away from the memories. Like I wanted to recreate everything like on a daily basis. And then one day I realized that was actually keeping me in pain, but choosing to be there, choosing to do all of the things that I was doing and drink the coffee that I was drinking and, do the same activities that I was doing. was actually keeping me in heartache, and I wasn't
Mm.
able to connect to hope. I couldn't see on the other side of me. I couldn't see outside of that grief.
Mm-hmm.
But there does come a day where it's almost like you wake up and you're like, no, today I don't feel that way. Today I feel different. Today I want to be happy. And I think that's, you know, giving yourself permission to be that, to be happy, to be able to smile and laugh again and connect to a future. And like you said, you're not dismissing anything that went before it.
Right.
But I think when we can connect to hope, we can look back over our pain in a much, I don't know, better way, or a lighter light, or it's not so
Mm-hmm.
painful.
Right. It totally changes your perspective.
Mm,
Yeah, it doesn't minimize it, but it gives you this richer perspective. And through that, I think you end up living with like a deeper sense of hope
mm,
after. Yeah, just like you were saying. And it's not like a sudden change, as you know. Like you wake up and you start to feel hope creep in. And it's like day after day after day. I just loved what you shared about your own personal journey with that.
mm.
That's just so relatable.
Yeah. And I think that I feel like it's a common thread between a
Mm-hmm.
lot of women, that because you're not really given tools to get out of that. You just feel like that's what you have to do. You feel like you have to be there to honor the memory, or to keep feeling as if they're close, but choosing to, be okay on the day that you feel okay, is still honoring the memory, and they're still close, and yeah, it's not changing that in any way.
Mm,
But like you said, it's just
absolutely.
shifting the perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
So you mentioned that Holy Week was sort of the foundation of your book.
Mm-hmm.
What initially made you make that connection between Holy Week and pregnancy and infant loss?
Yeah, great question. I don't have some profound answer to that. My husband, actually, one day as I was processing the outline of the book out loud, I had some elements of Holy Week in it, but he was like, whoa, back up a little bit. Look at Holy Week as a whole. And I think you'll find something more there. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was just kind of like a light bulb moment where suddenly the book made sense. And I've spent the last decade or so of my life in the church and working in the church. I have never looked with intentionality at the emotional experience of Jesus and his disciples during that week. I think we have like the traditions like, okay, Palm Sunday, the kids wave the branches, at least in our American churches. And then some churches will have a Good Friday service, but you wear your cute Easter dresses and do the Easter egg hunt on Sunday. But it just seems to be about tradition. And I've always missed the emotional component of what it must have been like for Jesus and his followers that experienced all the events of Holy Week. And what an emotional roller coaster it was to start with Palm Sunday and have these super high expectations. And then a few days later to be gathered around at the Last Supper and to hear Jesus, who's your beloved friend and teacher, say that he's going to leave in a few days. And you don't believe that that's real. So that's kind of the shock, but like, no, this isn't going to be our reality. And then, yeah, you see him crucified days later and the gut wrenching pain, again, the shock and the despair that must have brought. And then the silence of Saturday that is wedged between Good Friday and Resurrection Sunday. I think we skip over that a lot. And we like to skip right to the resurrection or right to Easter Sunday, because to be honest, it's hard to sit in that uncomfortable feeling and to dare imagine what it must have been like, especially for the women who had stayed by Jesus' side when he was getting buried. They were the first to see, that the tomb was empty. For them, they didn't know that Sunday was coming. We know because we're on this side of history. We know what follows Good Friday, but they didn't. And I just think that is so true for a lost mom. Like you and I were talking about earlier, we don't know that there's going to be that morning where we wake up and feel a bit more like ourselves or feel a bit more hopeful unless somebody has told us from their own personal experience. So hope again shows up in a surprising way. So it has just been a really beautiful experience writing from the perspective of Holy Week, giving the book that biblical framework, but also having the 5 stages of hope so that women can find themselves in the journey too and say, yeah, this is where I am. This is where I hope to be. This is what's ahead. And this is where I've been.
Yeah. And I think when you were talking, it was like you were obviously you had to go through your experiences to be able to view Holy Week through a different lens. And, you could have probably gone your whole life if you hadn't have had these, losses and challenges and still never made that connection. But
Right.
because you have had that, experience, you've been able to, see that there was so much more than just the days, so much more than just, and like you said, you skip over. A lot of people skip over that hard part in the middle. And when you're a grieving mom, sometimes you kind of want to skip over that too.
Absolutely.
I don't want to feel that. I don't want to go there. That's too painful. That's too hard. I want to go to the good part. I want to skip over to the good part.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we don't know that if that good part or when that good part's going to come. And like you said, unless someone can tell you, but then sometimes when you're in that hard part, you don't necessarily see that you can ever achieve the good part, that's ever going to happen for you.
Right.
I love that you've been able to make that connection and put like you said, a little sort of biblical framework around it, because it's also people going through, if they are in the religion, they can also see that for themselves as well.
Yeah. And I think one thing that, at least for me, but in so many women's stories that I've talked to, faith is really challenged after loss. I even hear from a lot of women who say, I wouldn't call myself a person of faith prior to my loss, but I almost wish I had something to cling to because I feel so lonely in my grief. And I'm asking all these questions about life. And is there heaven? And will I see my baby again? And why does pain happen? And all of this stuff. So I've just found it such an interesting conversation piece, especially like with messages on my Instagram account. I get to engage with a lot of women in different walks of faith because loss has this sort of universal effect on everybody, where you start to look underneath the surface of your life and say, why do I believe what I believe? You start to think about the future in a way that you've never thought about before and ask questions that you haven't thought about before. So for some women, it can be a hard spot for their faith to return to what it used to be. I would say if you push through that, and what's been my experience was that initial, man, I don't know how to believe what I've always believed, or I started questioning everything. Once I worked through that, on the other side of that, there was a lot more depth and intimacy with God that I didn't have pre-loss. But yeah, faith and hope seem to be the things that most women struggle with in some capacity after loss.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I questioned it. I felt like I was being punished by God, by my religion. I was like, what have I done? Like, I've been a good person. I grew up in the Catholic faith. Like, I've done everything right according to my faith. Like, why am I being punished? And, absolutely, it makes you question everything. It makes you question your faith, and then it makes you question everything about you as a person. And I think that's what makes it really hard to come back from as well, because it's such a personal thing. You question everything about you as a person, as a woman, as, the person that has been showing up all of these years. You're like, who am I now?
Yep, absolutely.
One in 4 pregnancies will result in miscarriage. 1 in 8 women will experience infertility. 1 in 100 women will experience recurrent miscarriage. And 1 in 160 births end in stillbirth. Have you been wanting to make a difference in the lives of women or men who have experienced pregnancy loss because you can see so many suffering in silence, but you just don't know how? Collectively, we can change how bereaved parents can access mental, physical, and emotional support after their experience. There is a lot of women with unhealed trauma, and there is a huge gap in the current support system when it comes to bereaved parents' recovery after loss. There are too many women and men suffering in silence. The Pregnancy Loss Practitioner Certification is a worldwide, one-of-a-kind program that gives you proven methods designed for healthcare professionals, medical staff, midwives, nurses, doulas, birth workers, coaches, and angel parents alike. The Pregnancy Loss Practitioner Certification is bridging that gap. It will give you a proven support structure to follow and education specific to pregnancy loss, created by a lost mum. It is creating more education specifically for loss so that you can enhance your service and become the point of difference. Or you can create the support that you so desperately needed in your healing after loss. This is the next level of growth and expansion you have been searching for. So does this sound like something that you have been searching for? Let's explore this more together. You can head to the episode show notes where you'll find the program application, or direct message me on Instagram and let's open up the conversation in how you can use this education. You have a gift, and I look forward to supporting you and witnessing you bring your gift to the world, healing and transforming women's lives. So what do you feel like the American church has missed when it comes to ministering to families who have experienced pregnancy and infant loss?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been my experience that there's not a whole lot of acknowledgement. The classic things that we can look at are how the American church typically celebrates Mother's Day and Father's Day. And I mean, I'm just as guilty of not even being aware of this until loss was part of my husband and my story. So I don't think that there's any malicious intent. It's just this unawareness. Unless there's somebody in leadership at a church who has this as part of their story, they don't have the awareness to be sensitive. So that it's something that my husband Mark and I try to be very inclusive and intentional about. When we celebrate Mother's Day the past few years, we have come up with creative ways to where we've surveyed moms in our church, women in our church, and we made a bunch of different options for like what has described your motherhood journey, including options like I always wished motherhood was going to be part of my story, but I don't have physical kids on the earth, or I have babies in heaven. I'm a foster mom. I'm a mentor mom. I'm a spiritual mom. All the different spectrum. Like I'm a mom in waiting. I'm going through infertility. I have angel babies, whatever it is. And then we chose flowers that represented each category of those motherhood buckets. And we made this beautiful arch and we put it out on our patio after the service, and moms were able to take pictures in front of it. And we explained like, this is more than just a beautiful display of flowers. It's actually representative of the mosaic of motherhood that we have here in our church. And there isn't one box of motherhood that fits everyone's experience. And it's been really, I think, healing and just freeing for women to be able to take a deep breath and feel like you don't have to be the mom who's here with 2 young kids that are biologically yours to feel like you fit. You could be a single woman in your 50s who always desired motherhood, but it hasn't looked the way that you wanted. Or maybe you're fostering, or you've adopted, or you're a mentor mom to 10 women in your life, whatever it is. It's really with that expanding our view of what we consider motherhood to be. That's just been one small way that we try to make space for the complexity of motherhood that's represented in our midst.
That makes it hard, doesn't it? I think it's a beautiful thing what you're doing. Like I can picture that in my head, like what you've been creating. But it makes it hard because everywhere you turn as a lost mom, there's no support, or there's lack of support and understanding. And especially when it comes, it's not even, if you rely so heavily on your church and your faith, and then there's no recognition there either. And you're just like, well, where do I turn? What do I do?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So it does make it really difficult navigating all of that, especially when everywhere you think there would be that support, there isn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm hopeful that as the years go by, there will be changes across the board for the church in terms of recognizing, hey, there's a lot more complexities to people's journeys and their stories. And it's not a one size fits all. And the church should be a place of honoring to all of those stories, because I think that they're all beautiful in God's eyes.
Yeah. And I think it's a beautiful thing that you're doing too. Just, making that one small shift, that change, and it's going to be making such a big difference in the women's lives. Just that one small recognition, seemingly small recognition, but it's such a big thing. thank you for actually creating and doing that and going a little bit, stepping outside the box.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's more we could be doing. I know that. But yeah, I think it's an important thing to look at what becomes part of your story and where you have lacked support in the past and say, how can I change this so that even one woman or one person who goes through my experience doesn't feel alone in theirs?
Mm, yeah. Now, I want to ask a question about neuroscience because
Mm-hmm.
it's something that I love. So we can go
Yay.
down this path.
Let's do it.
So, what connection have you found between neuroscience and how we process loss?
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh, like you said, this field fascinates me as well. So I love reading and learning why we do what we do, why our brains wire certain emotions and experiences like they do. Probably the most fascinating thing that I've read in terms of grief and the brain. It's by a neuroscientist named Robert Burton, and he talks about how the brain is naturally wired to fill in the blanks in a story. And the brain sees like stories as sequences. And so if you think back to, how we first learn about a sentence or a story, actually, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And he explains that when the brain tries to categorize events, traumas, things like that, it looks for pieces to fill in the sequence. And when you're able to complete a sequence, whether it's true or not, the brain, releases a bit of dopamine. So it's like a reward chemical. The brain likes to fill in the blanks on the sequences. So that sounds fine and good and all, except when it comes into situations like loss. This can span any type of loss. So it's not just pregnancy and infant loss. It could be, why did my parents get divorced? Why did I lose that job? Why did so-and-so cheat on me? Like it's anything where we don't have all the answers to, but pregnancy and infant loss is certainly one of them. So I may not know why my baby died, but I think a lot of us subconsciously, we are trying to fill in the blanks with a reason why. We want to give ourselves a reason why. And it was such a light bulb moment for me to read that. Oh, that's just not like me thinking that out loud. That's literally my brain trying to process and make sense of this life altering event in my story so that I can file it away in a nice categorical way. And why that's problematic is because most of the time we're not going to have those answers. So what our brain does is it will look for a familiar script. Like you were saying earlier, it's a very common response for women to feel like they're being punished. This is happening in my life because I must have done something in my past, or maybe I wasn't enough in this area. It's whatever kind of script your brain has been telling yourself for the things of life that you can't explain why they've happened to you, especially areas of hardship and loss. So I just found that to be so eye-opening to me. And that's something that if I'm walking with a woman as she's processing her story and I see she's coming back to the same thing over and over again, it's usually where they will get trapped up in shame.
Mm.
Or just really feeling like, man, this was my fault. Okay, but why? She can't explain it, but she keeps going back to the same thing. Well, this is why this happened 10 years ago. And this is why my best friend left me, like, because I'm not enough in whatever area. So it's helped me be a lot more mindful of the stories that we tell ourselves. Most of this is subconscious. So it's just really fascinating to pause, reflect, to journal, whatever it is, and start to be more mindful of how your brain is trying to fill in the gaps, stories that you don't have all the details to. And when you catch yourself having a thought like, oh, I must be being punished for something, or I wasn't enough in this area, or I'm the one to blame, it must have been my fault, to pause, to recognize that and say, no, that's not actually based in truth. I'm just believing that so that I have a reason why. But that's not true about who I am or why this thing happened. And it's hard for us to live in that gray space of not knowing. But if you can get to a point to say, you know what, I don't have the answer why, and I'm going to accept that or be okay with that, that's where I think you can turn the page for emotional health and a lot of healing to start to take place. So that in a nutshell is one thing that I've really focused in on in terms of how the brain processes grief and loss and those missing pieces of our story.
Yeah, as you were talking, it reminded me a lot of what I was going through. And I do work with my clients in childhood trauma as well. So essentially or childhood wounds, how we create these beliefs about ourselves out of something that maybe we were told as a child
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't true, or it wasn't ours. It wasn't, but we latch onto it as a belief about us as a person.
Right.
My mum couldn't give me something that I needed in that moment. So I'm not worth spending time on, or I'm not
Mm-hmm.
worthy. But in that moment, she could have been busy doing something else. But as a child, you're just like, well, I didn't get what I want. I didn't get my needs met.
Mm-hmm.
And then for me, what kept coming up for me was I was bullied in primary school. So there was a lot of sense of
Mm.
unworthiness. I was the bad person. I was the one that didn't fit in, me as a whole. I was the weird one, the odd one out. So when I went through my loss, my pregnancy loss, all of that came back. Of course
Mm-hmm.
it's me. Of course I'm the one that's to blame, because throughout my entire life, that's been my story. There's something wrong with me, inherently wrong with me.
Right.
I'm not worthy to have this as part of my life. But there has to be that shift. There has to be that moment you turn the light on it and go, no, actually, no, that's not true. Like, just because I was bullied in school doesn't mean that was anything wrong with me. And just because I went through this loss, that doesn't mean there was anything wrong with me. Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not broken. I felt so broken. But we have to start to turn the light and shift the tables on our story so that we can start to, like you said, turn the page. Like, you can start to write a new story. You can start to change how your future's going to look, where you're
Mm-hmm.
not carrying that unworthiness, that shame, that guilt, that blame with you that whole time. But it is that common story, and that common story can go back to childhood.
Yes. And it usually does, just like you said. Yeah. Thanks for sharing what you shared. And yeah, my heart breaks to know that that is part of your
Mm.
experience. I'm also so thankful for how clearly you can recognize that. Just like you said, things that came up during your loss stemmed back to childhood. And that is so true for many of us. I don't think we often pause, or, a therapist is great, somebody to help guide you through a process like that. I'm not sure I would have gotten there on my own, but yeah, thank you for sharing that in such a real and practical way, what it looks like.
Yeah, my pleasure. And that's the thing, that I didn't know that the stories that I had from my childhood were playing out for me
Mm.
as an adult. I
Wow.
was like, I couldn't make that connection, or whether I didn't want to make that connection initially.
Mm-hmm.
But then obviously through my loss, that was where I did a lot of introspection, a lot of reflection on me as a person. And like you said, seeking external help. Like, I saw a therapist, I worked with a lot of coaches that were able to give me tools to start to look at things in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I made the connection to childhood wounds and what I was processing, the stories that I was
Wow.
telling myself as
Mm-hmm.
an adult navigating loss.
Mm-hmm.
And now this is where I want to also bring awareness, like, because it's not just the loss that we're trying to
Mm-mm.
process. And like you've said, it's all of the stories that are on a loop in your mind. And then, like you said, your brain kind of just takes pieces to make
Mm-hmm.
that connection and then files it away. But as soon as it files it away, it's going to be filing away, I'm not worthy.
Exactly.
I can't have what I want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you look at most of those stories that we've got, on a loop in our brain, if we actually sat down and wrote them out and asked those stories,
Mm-hmm.
is this true? Like, more often than not, the answer was going to be no.
Exactly. Or showed them to a few trusted people in our lives. Is this true about how you see me and how you've experienced me? Yeah, I think we'd be shocked in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was actually one of the exercises I had to do when I was navigating it, was write
Mm.
down 5 statements about myself and find some trusted people to tell me the truth in that, or get them to write 5 statements about me, so that
Mm.
I could actually start to see that the lens I was viewing myself through wasn't the lens
Mm-hmm.
that other people were seeing me through. And it's a really good way to actually start to break those patterns, because we can very, very easily tell ourselves till we're black and blue that what we're thinking is 100% set in stone true.
Yep.
But then you ask the people around you, your loved ones, your parents, like a sibling or a close friend, and they'd be like, no, like, why are you even thinking about, thinking this of yourself? So I think it's a beautiful thing, like you said, to start to have that awareness.
Right. Yeah. It's hard, but so helpful. Definitely.
Yeah. It's not easy. And like you said, it's hard to get to that realization on your own. It is through support, through someone on the outside of you that'll help you get to that place.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing everything that you have shared today. I have absolutely loved, and I've just been like hanging on your every word. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Sharna. It was a pleasure to share this conversation with you.
So welcome. A couple of things before we go. Just a quick question. So what do you wish you knew after experiencing pregnancy loss?
I think I wish I knew in that immediate time that this was going to be a significant chapter of my story, but it wasn't going to be all of my story. And in that first probably 6 months, it just felt like this was all that it was ever going to be. That, I questioned everything about how my future would look. Am I going to be able to have any kids? Like, what does that mean for me as a motherhood? I'm reimagining like the family that I always had in my mind. And time and perspective has shown me, this has been and will always be a very significant piece of my story, but it'll be a chapter. It's not the whole thing. And I think that would have helped me if I had somebody who was on the other side of loss sit with me in those months to tell me from their own experience, this is what it's been like for me. And it's okay that it hurts right now, but this isn't going to be the end. And whatever that means for you, like the end of a dream, the end of what you thought your motherhood would be like, all of that is not just about having kids. There's so many other layers wrapped into pregnancy and infant loss. It'll be a significant piece of your story, but it will not be your whole story.
That's perfect, because it can absolutely feel like it's the end. Yeah. How do I move on from this? How do I get up? How do I go and show up in my life after this? Thank you so much for sharing that and being so open and vulnerable with that piece of your story as well.
Thanks, Sharna.
So where can people find you, everything about what you do, your book, all of the good stuff?
Yeah. My book's available. It's called Miscarried Hope. It's available on Amazon, any other major book retailer. And I'd love to connect with you. My jewelry site at hopeagaincollective.com. I do ship to Australia.
Yes.
Especially now that the pandemic restrictions have lifted, thank goodness. Yeah. And I have a spot for any woman who would like to share her story. She's free to submit her story on my site if she feels like that would be a healing tool for her. So that's where you can find me. I'm on Instagram at hopeagaincollective.com as well. And hope I can connect with you.
Thank you so much. And yes, it was a bit of an issue through COVID, but we persisted. We
did.
We got there, and I got your beautiful earrings and jewelry, and I love it. I get so many compliments when I do wear them, and I'm so proud to say like where they come from, why they're made, and who they support. So, even just having something like that to open the communication between, like to just start a conversation. So, that in itself is huge, because hopefully we can change the way people talk about it as well.
Yes. And I'm so thankful for your support.
Anytime. We're probably getting some more, but because I keep seeing some amazing designs come up on your site. So
thank you, Sharna.
I'm like, I need them. You're so welcome. Thank you again, Rachel, for being a part of the What I Wish I Knew After Pregnancy Loss podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you to all that have listened in. If this episode was valuable to you, I invite you to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and I look forward to supporting you on the next episode. Thank you for listening in with me today. I hope you found this episode helpful. If you did, I would absolutely love to hear from you. take a screenshot of this episode, share it to social media, and tag me at Institute of Healing_PL. I love seeing what is resonating with you right now. If you want to chat further, I invite you to connect with me through Instagram. Head over and follow my Instagram account, send me a DM, and let's open the communication. If you want to know more about how you can be the support for others, head to the show notes and fill out the application form for the Pregnancy Loss Practitioner certification. I want to also note here that what I share within the episodes is not medical advice. If you need further support, please consult your doctor. Thank you again. Much love to you. Be gentle with yourself, and I look forward to supporting you on the next episode.